Hey class, let's go ahead and get started with our first lecture, which is Introduction to Kinesiology. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started with the material. All right, looking at our first PowerPoint, we can look at our course outcomes or lecture objectives. And what we're going to do is learn generally about what the field of kinesiology actually is. We're going to understand some definitions and some examples of physical activity, and then we'll go over several terms that are important to distinguish when talking about this field. So, first thing we want to understand is that kinesiology is a relatively new field in the realm of other sciences. So, when we compare kinesiology to biology, sociology, and anthropology, kinesiology is a life science, but it's the newest one. But it's also the fastest growing major in higher education. You see this stat right here. We have in the United States over 530 undergraduate departments and almost 500 master's programs. This is huge compared to what it was a few years ago. One thing we also want to understand about kinesiology is that for our field, we usually refer to it as academic kinesiology rather than clinical. You will take some clinical courses if your major is kinesiology, but a lot of it is academic, which is based in theory. So you learn a lot of theoretical knowledge rather than doing clinical type work or hands-on experience, which you will do more so in your graduate programs if you go on to a master's program in clinical exercise physiology or any athletic training or physical therapy or medical program. But for us right now, what we want to understand is that we're academic, which means a lot of what we learn is based off of scientific knowledge, research, and like I said, a lot of theories. We also want to look at how do we learn kinesiology? And so we learn it usually in three different ways. Or it's kind of referred to as the sphere of kinesiology, where you see these kind of three little satellites here. First is experience. We have to have experience in physical activity in order to understand kinesiology as a field. This experience, though, can be actually doing it. Or it can be observing physical activity. So it's some sort of experience, either exercising yourself, playing a sport, being physically active every day, or observing people who are being physically active or playing sports. The next is scholarship of physical activity. With scholarship of physical activity, it's more so about what we are learning. It's again that theoretical knowledge. So things we learn based in theory, laws, anything from reading research articles, sitting in class, listening to lectures, all of that is scholarship of activity, of physical activity. And then last is professional experience in. So this would be your internships, your practicums, getting a job in this field. These three are related and they build on top of each other, they feed off of each other. But in order to fully understand kinesiology and physical activity, these three ways to learn have to be applied. Next is I want to just touch on briefly is when you get your Bachelor's of Science degree in kinesiology, this is the kind of your base. And so if you look here at my little animations, we see that this bachelor's degree in kinesiology is a starting point. And in order to be successful in this field, usually you have to do some sort of graduate study. That can be kind of anything to getting a master's degree in kinesiology, where you're going to study ex-phys or motor learning or biomechanics, or go into the doctorate side, which is the athletic training, chiropractic care, medicine, nutrition, occupational physical therapy, anything along. Finn, stop. Finn, no. So, I will say that if you don't know this already, having just a basic bachelor's degree in kinesiology usually is not enough to go in and work in the field. Usually you have to do some sort of graduate program. All right, next is understanding the terminology here. And so there's lots of different terms And I'm not going to read them to you because you know how to read and you know how to look at terms. But what I will suggest for you is to be able to look at and differentiate between the different terms that we'll talk about in this lecture. And so like I said, I'm not going to actually read them to you, but what I will give you tips on is when you start to study these terms, I have in some of my slides like italicized certain words. Pay attention to those italicized words that can help differentiate. And then in some other slides, I'll have colored words where they kind of stand out, and that's what I want you to focus on to learn that definition. And so these three here, knowing the difference between kinesiology, exercise science, physical education. Coming over here, knowing sports studies, which is more of like the sport management side of kind of the bigger umbrella of kinesiology sport management. But sport studies, we will talk about philosophy in this class. We will touch on the history, a little bit on psychology. We'll talk about sports. So we will get into sport studies. So again, just kind of know that definition. Next is let's talk briefly about physical activity and what it is and what it's not. So we look here is just what is physical activity? First over here, it is not an involuntary movement. And it also is like not performed without a specific purpose, meaning that all physical activity has a specific purpose. There's some goal in mind when doing physical activity. We see here technical definition, intentional, voluntary, and directed towards achieving a goal. So it can be any goal though. It doesn't have to be fitness. It could be I'm doing physical activity because I'm walking my dogs around the block because they need the exercise and I need fresh air. It doesn't mean your goal when you're walking your dogs outside is to become fit. There may be another goal attached to it, and that's fine. That's considered physical activity. When we say large muscle movement or large muscle activity, such as like going through a large range of motion, walking, jogging, cycling, swimming, gardening, doing yard work, housework, all of that is physical activity. So again, just remember what it is not. It is not involuntary and it always has a purpose. So here's another definition, like I mentioned a second ago, with that large muscle movement, anything from sports, games, work, daily activities, and exercise. So now that gets us to what is exercise? Here's that colored word at the bottom. Every time we do exercise, there is the purpose of becoming fit. So if your goal is not fitness in some sort, then you may not be doing exercise. You may just be doing physical activity. So we have physical movements, increased rate of energy used by the body, and my purpose is fitness. But fitness is a kind of a very broad term. Fitness can be anything from cardiovascular fitness, cardiorespiratory fitness, muscular fitness, such as muscular strength, muscular power, muscular endurance, flexibility, body composition, mental health, whatever. All of that is some sort of fitness. So whatever it is, exercise is always about the purpose of becoming fit. Know the difference between these two definitions. Next here is another term, physical fitness. And now we're looking at the body's capacity to adapt and respond favorably to doing physical effort, like exercise, working out. And so over here, let's go back. Body's capacity to adapt and respond favorably. This is all about adaptations. And so we'll talk more later in this class about how the body responds, like cardiovascular wise, what happens to heart rate, what happens to all of those muscular fitness characteristics. And so this is just a question right here that you can think about. How do you think the body responds and then adapts to physical effort? And so that's what our definition for physical fitness is. It's just this response acutely and then a chronic change that occurs from experiencing long-term physical activity and physical exercise. All right, next we have two terms that are very similar and sometimes used interchangeably, wellness and health. So let's first start with wellness. When I think of wellness, I think of holistic wellness and lots of different components, like it says, emotional, mental, physical, social, spiritual, all of that. Another big one for this definition is overall state of well-being. QOL means quality of life. And it contributes to your ability to give back to society. So, are you providing a service to society? Are you well enough and healthy enough to contribute to societal living? Health, I like the first part of this definition, and this is what I would memorize if I were you. Absence of illness or disease. When you are healthy, you are not sick, you do not have an illness, you do not have a disease. Sometimes you also don't have some sort of injury that is limiting you from like being in your healthiest state possible. So positive state of well-being, but health includes the definition of wellness. So we see down here, it includes those definitions. So we take the definition of wellness and you put it in health, plus take away illnesses, diseases, injuries, and you are a healthy person. Okay, so know the difference in those two definitions. Next here, we're looking at the difference between recreation and leisure, which are very similar. When we think of recreation, we usually think of outdoor activities. Anything where you are going out into nature and exploring the world in a sense, and it should refresh or renew your strength and spirit after you've been maybe inside all day working, doing chores, doing schoolwork, taking classes, whatever it is. It's a diversion from your everyday work hours, your life hours, class work, whatever, where you have this sense of renewal. And again, usually recreation is outside. Leisure, recreation can be done during leisure hours. Leisure hours are when you are not at work, you're not at school, you're not taking classes, you're not doing chores that you have to do. You are doing something that you enjoy that brings you satisfaction. So, freedom from work or responsibilities when you can just enjoy yourself. You can use this time for physical activity, which is what we want most people to do, but you can sit on the beach, you can read a book, you can draw and color and write and do whatever you want. It's just something that brings you joy and satisfaction. Okay, finishing up kind of the last two is play and games. When we think of play, we think of fun, devoid of constraints, amusement, that you're doing freely. I think of children. So, children playing, there's no rules, there's no constraints, there's no issues going on. Finn, come here. Finn, Finn, Finn. Games described as playful activity. Finn, Finley, stop. They are rule governed. So if you have a game, there has to be some sort of rule. It can still be fun and it doesn't have to be competitive, but there's usually a rule because if there's no rules, then it's just like aimless play. And we go back to that definition of play. But with games, there are some sort of rules. Same with sports. Sports have rules. They can be informal or formal, but they usually involve competition. Like we said, it can just be we're playing a sport like a pickup basketball game, where we're engaged in it for fun. Or a game, or sorry, a sport can be like athletics, which we see the definition here, highly organized, structured competitions among skilled athletes. Okay. So there are very different definitions for kind of everything that we just went through. But you can see that lecture was short, sweet. Like I said, to wrap up, what you need to kind of gather from what we just went over is mainly just differentiating between those terms that we learned. Focusing on the italicized word or the colored word, or finding some sort of clue in there that can help you identify what that definition and term are, how they're related. Okay. All right, that's it for this lecture, and I'll see you in the next one.